Please give a warm welcome to Kathryn Bigelow.
Invented as we go along. All right. Now I can see everybody. Okay, before I give a kind of an overview of how this film came about, I just want to introduce these wonderful people here. And to my left is K'naan Warsame, who is from Somalia and has a very good understanding of al-Shabab, and will speak a little bit about the birth of Shabaab, which I think is important to understand and give this piece context. And next to him, Julita Lozano, who is Assistant District Attorney for Manhattan, and she has just handled just recently, a very big investigation dealing with ivory dealers, and she will talk about that prosecution as well as her investigators and an extremely important lieutenant that she worked with, and her need for more investigators and how critical this problem is, even for New York City, which I think is going to be kind of enlightening to many people, certainly was to me. To her left is Peter Godwin, a documentary filmmaker, novelist, screenwriter, grew up in, or actually was raised in Zimbabwe, and was a human rights lawyer for many years until he transitioned here. And he's very versed in terrorism and the militias that are on the rise across Africa. And he'll speak about that. And then Peter Knights, who is the director of wildaid.org, who was one of the initiators of this piece, and he'll speak about the initiatives that they have and ones they've been incredibly successful with for shark fin soup, and they're especially in China, predominantly in China, obviously, and his what his organization is doing to try to lower the demand for ivory in Asia and around the world as well. So he'll speak about that, which will be a wonderful kind of overview, I think, for everybody. So how this came about, I've been an animal advocate, I would say, as long as I can remember. And about a year ago, I had the fortune of meeting both Hillary and Chelsea Clinton. Chelsea had just come back from sub-Saharan Africa with her father, and had just at the time when poachers had put cyanide in an elephant watering hole, and I mean there were herds and herds that had been slaughtered as a result of it, and I was very moved and decided that I needed to do something about this, and to the extent that I could, whatever I could sort of enter this world, try to create a dialogue, try to raise awareness in whatever way that might be potentially meaningful. And then I had a conversation with Peter Knights from Wild Aid, and we talked about the various avenues, a lot of research basically was kind of where I was at the time, and trying to kind of come up to speed, could never come up to his speed, but come up to speed as quickly as I could, because the urgency was so great. And time was of the essence, and we are running out of time, certainly as we speak right now. And then at that point, I made the connection between terrorism, which was just beginning to be reported about the Westgate Mall, and poaching, and that was how al-Shabab was financing, to a certain extent, or to a large extent, a lot of their nefarious activities. And so once I made that connection, I realized that would be an interesting opportunity to connect the dots, and I chose to do it as a PSA because time is of the essence. I mean, a feature would be wonderful, but they're dying. I mean, we're not going to have them around, unfortunately, for much longer. And And so then I enlisted the help of Scott Burns, a great, great, great writer, and we put a treatment together, and I decided to do it as a piece of animation, and that really is because it would be impossible for me to sit in a cutting room and look at live footage of an animal being suffering at all, day after day. So not that it's easy to look at this necessarily, but it creates a kind of mediated layer, and also I thought it might be a little bit more accessible, and therefore perhaps reach a larger audience. And then I found, knowing nothing about animation, I found an extraordinary expert in this field, and that's Sandy Rabins, and she kind of walked me through all the steps, and I'm very conversant with live action, not conversant with animation. It was a great kind of learning curve. And she introduced me to Sam Mishlap, who is the predominant artist here, who really created this whole look, and I sort of nicknamed him the Goya of the animation world. I don't know if you're familiar with Goya's Disasters of War, but I would call this Sam Mishlap's Disasters of the Elephant Poaching Crisis. And then the wonderful Paul Otteson, who was the sound designer on Hurt Locker and Zero Dark 30, and he agreed to help us out with sound. Now, this has been a labor of love, and people were... I would get these drawings at 3 o'clock in the morning because everybody had day jobs, of course. And, Paul Otteson, I'd be working around all these giant movies that he's mixing. And, I'd come over to the stage at 10 at night, and we'd be doing some sound mixing. But I also have to say that none of this would have been possible without the incredible and courageous support of my producing partner and collaborator, Annapurna Pictures' Megan Ellison. So I just want to say I'm indebted to her, for sure. So just to start things off and talk a little bit about the birth of Shabaab and whatever you think might be helpful to understand the context of this, I'd love to turn it over to you.
Sure. I'm born in Mogadishu, Somalia, and I'm a musician and writer and a few other things. And I grew up partly in that city that you all know only from, probably mostly from news and all of that. But I grew up there. I was there till I was 14, and then left to this part of the world, New York and so on. Just want to give you context of Somalia is considered a failed state, they say, and it's a country that hasn't had a centralized government for maybe the last 20 some odd years. So you could imagine it's like this city, for example, without any police or ambulance system or so that's kind of what Somalia has been for a long time. And so you've got all these young people who have no education, no any prospects in life, nothing, no net to cast for the future. And so that's largely the state of the country. And in around 2005 there was a group called the Islamic Courts Union, which came into power. Now, this group comes out of a bunch of basically businesses and different people in the community who wanted to figure out a way, when we don't have a centralized government, how do we manage? How do we manage these streets? How do women walk at night without being raped? How do businesses survive without being under the weapon of extortion constantly? And so a bunch of businesses and kind of elders and local leaders got together, and they forged a sort of a semi-government called the Islamic Courts Union. In this part of the world, that's an unfortunate name to have. But back home, the Islamic Courts Union is not necessarily that Islamic. Because the country is Muslim, it creates a banner under which everyone can say, I identify with this. You know, it's like calling something the American society of something. And so then you don't have the Latinos saying, well, you don't have the blacks saying, you've got that banner. And that to us is the way Islam is seen in kind of certain countries. I mean, of course, it's people's religion, and some, you know, people practice, some of them do, some of them don't. But under that, it's a national identity, and so they called it the Islamic Courts Union. I should let you know that we don't have a system of law like you guys have, and actually, I think ours suits us better than yours suits us, because the system of Somali law is based on customary law, which basically means that all observed behaviors, norms of society, is the only articles of law which can be introduced to the community. So there's no laws in Somali which can be introduced by a politician or a religious figure. All law comes from behavioral norms of the people, which really works for the Somalis. So that's actually what the Islamic Courts Union was administering. In them, you have different ideologies. You have people who want to be more Islamic than, who want to have a staunch concept of the religion, the people who believe in Sharia, and people who believe in the cultural norms. So you have that kind of battle always going on in them. In 2005, that group secured the country, and they took hold of this nation that for 20 years has had no central government, and they made Somalia livable, incredibly livable. So much so that a large part of the diaspora was beginning to return to Somalia. This is 2005. Myself included, I had plans to go back home. I have in that time become a musician that was recognized at home, and so it was a big thing for me to return. But what happened was the United States got wind of what this Islamic Courts Union is doing, and it didn't seem like a good idea to the policymakers in this country, foreign policy makers. And they basically started to figure out covert and overt operations as to how to destabilize this group that's calling themselves. George Bush at the time thought, Islamic Courts Union, that sounds like my nightmare. So we must end this. And so so what happened, long story short, Ethiopia came in, America came in, they destabilized the little bit of peace that we had, the little bit of stability that we had, and we have al-Shabab that came out of the vacuum, out of the void of a total hopelessness and loss to this country. I just wanted to give you context so that you understand when we're watching this very prominent group in the video, in this amazing film, al-Shabab. They're not born out of the generally kind of imagined African incompetence and insanity, the madness of these people we don't understand. They come from a very particular failure, one which we have a large hand in. And so when you watch this video, I wanted you to have kind of not know that you can be a part of the solution, but you also kind of are a part of the problem, and therefore it's a kind of a responsibility of yours. That's all I wanted to do, is give you a little bit of context. Thanks.
That's beautiful. Julieta.
Can you all hear me without the microphone? Okay. No? Okay. To follow up on all of our respective responsibilities as faulting, the faults that we have, as well as the responsibilities, I wanted to talk about my experiences prosecuting environmental crimes, including the sale of ivory and other illegal wildlife items in New York City. and in New York State. It may surprise many of you to know that in the Diamond District, ivory is for sale. Not legally. It's in this country, we have kind of a differing layers of laws that protect wildlife and that make the sale of ivory illegal. And on the large level, you have the federal laws that apply to people who are bringing in ivory or exporting ivory or selling it across state lines. You also have international treaties, of which the United States is a party, regarding which countries are allowed to export ivory, ivory-producing countries, and which are not. And the United States, as a party to those treaties, agrees not to allow the import from prohibited countries. Then you have each state has its own ability to regulate the sale of wildlife, including ivory. New York State has jurisdiction, and I'm a prosecutor in Manhattan, so I follow New York State laws. That's the kind of law that I prosecute. And what those laws prohibit is basically the sale, the commercialization, which is broadly defined not just as a sale, but any offer for sale. So if you have an item with a price tag on it in a shop, you're commercializing. And within the boundaries of New York State. So I started this kind of work. I've been a prosecutor for approximately 16 years. And in 2000 approximately, I began looking into and prosecute environmental crimes work. And that, for those of you not particularly familiar with law and order, there are two sides of enforcement, and there are lawyers who do what I do. And you file motions, you file accusatory instruments, you indict people. But in order to get to that point, you need the investigators, the police officers, the people who go in and do the undercover work and buy the ivory, who follow targets around, who figure out who's getting money from whom for certain sales. And in New York, primarily, the agency that I work with and have worked with since 2000 is the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation. They are the experts on the wildlife trade and on environmental law in general. So they do asbestos and hazardous waste, and wildlife is just one of their areas of expertise. We often, when I work with them, we often work with the federal government as well, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, because as you can imagine, when we have people in Manhattan shops selling ivory, they didn't get it here because there are no elephants here. So somebody's bringing it in. So we need to have that connection. Manhattan is, by all accounts, the second largest market for ivory, which is very surprising to people. But if you really think about it, New York is the crossroads for many people. It's a huge business center for all kinds of products, and ivory happens to be one of them. We also have ports here. So we have airports, we have ways to get in through ocean carriers. So New York is a place where we find the majority of ivory in the United States being sold. So I started these cases back in 2000, and it was shocking to me how easily investigators could go in and find ivory for sale. In New York, you are not allowed to sell unless, and I'll explain this a little more when we talk about the laws, you're not allowed to sell ivory or offer it for sale unless you have a permit given under very restrictive conditions. So antiques, for instance, musical instruments, not little trinkets, not little carved items. And it was incredibly easy to go in and make these purchases and prosecute these folks. So easy that we realized this is a huge problem. This isn't just one or two shops. I believe it was in 2006, there was some sort of research study by a not-for-profit group who went to shops in New York City and found approximately 150 shops selling ivory without permits, not just completely illegal. I had the honor and absolute pleasure of being trained to do this and learning my way around the ivory trade in New York City from what pretty much everyone in this state and outside this state would agree, from a person who was one of the preeminent experts of the commercial ivory trade in the United States. And he was a lieutenant at the Department of Environmental Conservation. His name was John Fitzpatrick, and he was unbelievably committed to this cause and worked tirelessly and saw the exact connections between something that sold on Madison Avenue and the fact that elephants were being slaughtered at an alarming rate. And he and I, from 2000 till last year, worked on all of the biggest ivory investigations in this city. Unfortunately and tragically, he died in May at the age of 46, and he will never be able to be replaced in the work that we do, but we are continuing in his honor. And with respect to what we did in 2000, we started cases that led to other cases, and these, we started with just undercover purchases and one-off prosecutions of small shops. And then we realized that we had to work up and see where were these people getting all of these items that appeared to be newly made items. So with John and with the Department of Environmental Conservation, we expanded our focus, and in 2012, we actually investigated. It was an over a year-long undercover investigation into multiple shops in the Diamond District brazenly selling ivory. We did search warrants. We did purchases from these places. With John's expertise, we were able to, as the undercovers, I didn't, but the investigators did, identify when they looked at the items that they were in fact ivory and not plastic. We purchased, and then we did search warrants. So instead of just having as evidence the one piece of ivory that we purchased, we went in and we got everything in those shops, everything. We seized approximately 1 ton of ivory in those shops, which a rough equivalent, a wildlife expert said was probably the remains of approximately 100 elephants. And the retail value was approximately $2 million. Having said that, the only thing that we could charge these people with was the lowest level felony in New York State, an E felony, which is maximum 4 years in jail, but most likely if you don't have a record, is probation. So that's what we had. And that's what we did. And that investigation was used as an example when public sentiment, kind of independently, started really, and I'm sure you all read in the New York Times and other press, there's just the drum roll of people saying this does matter, and this does matter to New Yorkers, and this is why it matters, and pressing our legislators to do something about it.
I
Oh, go ahead.
Well, but let's hear from Peter too. Now. I mean, well, I just wanted to say that I think we should come back to Julieta. We'll take questions from the audience, but I think the idea that that what is sadly fueling this slaughter are these militias across Africa that are realizing that these elephants are basically ATM machines for them, and therefore, we're now witnessing industrialized slaughter. So what Julieta is saying is all this, the trinkets that are making their way here in greater and greater and greater quantities have a lot to do with the rise of the militias and perhaps the ease of execution, no pun intended, of these beautiful, extraordinary animals which are going to go extinct if something is not done about the demand. And once the demand is stopped or stigmatized, then the ivory becomes valueless. So that would be, of course, my goal. And Peter, I think if you could talk a bit about the economics of this.
Sure. I'm prone to stage fright, so I'm going to have some notes, but I will promise to look as though I'm ad-libbing. The firm aluminium or aluminum, as I understand it's called, stroller or walker of notes, I'm afraid. My name is Peter Godwin, in case you've already forgotten. And I was oddly born and raised in Africa on the Mozambique border of what is now Zimbabwe. The Afrikaners further south had a disparaging name for us English-speaking white Africans. They called us soat peel. In Afrikaans, this means salt penis. They said we had 1 foot in Africa and 1 in Europe, so our genitals marinated in the ocean. Back then, wildlife was plentiful. People were few. When I started writing about poaching in the 1980s as the correspondent for the London Times in Africa, it was a story that revolved around the human communities that lived among elephants. In truth, odd as it may sound, conservation is really all about people, not about animals. In those days, conservation was bound up in land usage, in scarce resources, in poverty. How could conservationists who tended to be white people from the north tell Africans how to use their land, especially when these northern folk had long since gotten rid of the bulk of their own larger wildlife, bears, wolves, bison? In some quarters, conservation was even seen as the last kick of a colonial horse. Wildlife conservation, we argued then, would succeed or fail for economic rather than aesthetic reasons alone. We tend to think of elephant in particular as living in game reserves, in national parks, largely segregated from humans. But until recently, 80% of elephants lived outside parks, among local communities, just as they had for thousands of years. Only, of course, the number of humans ballooned, and so the two species were pushed together as never before, and they came into conflict for resources. To us then, the key was to involve those local communities front and center in conservation, to give them a major stake in the survival of elephants and other high-impact animals. Not just around the edges, selling souvenirs to tourists or dancing for them or serving as staff in high-end lodges, but in the ownership and income of the safari and tourism businesses themselves. It was not enough to anthropomorphize animals, especially those who we tend to admire most, the so-called charismatic megafauna, of which the elephant is the apex animal. If the local communities were empowered in this way, we believed, they would provide the main level of protection for these endangered species. But the story has changed since then, especially in East and Central Africa, which has seen the most devastatingly precipitous collapse of elephant numbers. Poaching has now become industrialized and militarized. The Janjaweed militia in Sudan, the Lord's Resistance Army in northern Uganda, al-Qaeda offshoots in Kenya and Tanzania, there's increasing evidence that all get significant funding from ivory poaching. And, as we've heard, al-Shabab in Somalia. Recent investigations of al-Shabab estimate that as much as half their funds now come from ivory poaching. I was in Nairobi attending the Hay Story Moja Literary Festival when the Westgate Mall was attacked almost exactly a year ago. One of our writers, the wonderful Ghanaian poet Kofi Awuna, met his death there. Ivory is the perfect resource for a well-armed terrorist group. Such groups are now equipped with night vision goggles, with satellite phones, with machine guns. They have 4x4 vehicles and even small planes. Often they are up against poorly armed, poorly paid, and poorly trained wildlife rangers. Poaching has, in effect, become an extension of war in a huge swathe of territory from Somalia to Kenya to northern Uganda, Chad, Congo, and the Central African Republic. And the clock is running down fast. Elephants make a ludicrously easy target. They're easy to find, easy to stalk, huge in size, and highly communal in their behavior. With such sophisticated relationships and such loyalty to one another that if you identify and kill the elephant matriarch first, the others will often mill around, loath to abandon her, trying to help her up, even as they become targets to high-caliber machine gun fire themselves. Now, industrial-scale poaching is reaching further south into the traditionally more secure herds. In southern Tanzania, the vast Selous National Park, twice the size of Switzerland, was home to 110,000 elephant back in 1976. Today, there are about 13,000 left. In the last 5 years alone, it's lost nearly 3/4 of its elephant population. And just over its border in northern Mozambique, the elephants in Nyassa National Park are under assault like never before, their numbers halving in the last 5 years. With the soaring prices of ivory and the new wealth in the client countries, China in particular, the core elephant populations in Zambia, Botswana, and South Africa are now coming under pressure. In my own shattered country of Zimbabwe, poachers have recently started using an appalling new tactic. In the dry season, when elephants must converge daily on smaller and smaller waterholes, the poachers have been lacing these with arsenic. Dozens of elephants have met excruciating deaths in this manner. Kruger National Park in South Africa, the oldest wildlife park on the continent, once considered impregnable, is now unable to protect its rhino population. More than 600 rhino were poached last year, and this year it's already approaching 500. And it's also seeing an uptick in elephant poaching there. We are no longer on a gentle downward slope here. We are rushing towards the end game of an extraordinary beast, the largest living terrestrial animal, Loxodonta africana, the African elephant. I hope that we will not be the generation that allowed this to happen.
Peter.
Thank you. I was very excited when Kathryn started to talk to me about this project because, as we've just heard, for me this is a moment where the world can slightly recontext the whole ivory issue, that it's not just about animals dying, it's not just about extinction, it's about human beings and human suffering too. And I think the analogy I like to look at is this might be the blood ivory moment. We had the blood diamonds, exactly the same phenomena. It's something being used as a financing mechanism, as a currency. And if anything, elephants are even more vulnerable than diamonds. You know, it's very easy to find, it's very easy to sell it. I originally was an economist. Running a wildlife organization is not the normal career track for an economist. But the thing that I saw, which perhaps nobody had seen up to that time, was conservation was taking a predominantly supply-side effort. All the energy was going into trying to protect the supply of animals. And it wasn't working at various times. And I looked into why it wasn't working. Every time we've had these poaching crises, and we've had them periodically, it always corresponds to a fast economic growth in the consuming countries. So when there was the Saudi oil boom, the Yemeni rhino horn dagger handle market exploded, and we had a huge rhino poaching crisis. Now, more latterly, it's the Chinese economic growth, which has been phenomenal, and is something which has brought millions of people out of poverty. The downside is there's been this new money which has been looking for a place to go, and it's looked for prestige items, silly items in some cases, things like rhino horn, things like ivory, things like shark fin soup. Shark fin soup has no flavor. It's just basically the texture of the whole thing, but it's seen as being a prestigious item. And our WildAid's unique insight was that nothing would change unless you impacted the demand, and that we've been kind of banging on at the wrong end for too long. We were never going to get enough resources to protect the animals in Africa. We can't do that with the drugs trade. We can't stop the drugs trade with trillions of dollars going into interdiction and supply-side attempts. Why hasn't it succeeded? Because we haven't addressed the demand. Now, the big difference with wildlife is it's not associated, wildlife consumption is not associated with poverty or despair or addiction. Quite the opposite. It's associated with wealth and affluence and ostentatious behavior. So it seemed to me the key was to make that consumption socially unacceptable in those countries. So back in 1996, and at that time, the key countries that were problematic were not China, because there was no money in China. It was Taiwan, Hong Kong, and Singapore. So they all had to follow the money. That is the key. Those places were the big markets. We worked with Jackie Chan, a whole host of stars. And it's interesting that now, for example, on rhino horn, Taiwan is never cited as a problem. It was the #1 problem in 1993. So we can affect these social changes through massive public awareness and through legal issues like bans. That's also a great way of promulgating public awareness. But the ban in itself, to me, is only the start. It's the public awareness generator that really makes a law effective. Laws are only effective if they have broad public support and buy-in. And so that's a sort of outreach and education process. And what we've managed to do is recruit now over 100 different celebrities in Asia, from Jackie Chan to Yao Ming to Olympic athletes to business leaders, all to support this cause. And my original job was as an undercover investigator. And I was going to Africa looking at the poaching, I was going to Asia looking at the smuggling. And what I found with people buying these products is very often, even people selling the products in places like Taiwan were completely unaware of the chain that they were involved in. All they knew is this product arrived. Some of them didn't even know what a rhino looked like. And so there was a huge disconnect between the market. And then people would say, well, you know, the elephants died, we're just recycling the ivory, or the rhino died, and, you know, it's just recycling it. It's like, well, no, you know, there's 24/7 protection, these animals being poached, rangers are dying, poachers are dying. They didn't appreciate that. So it's a massive education that's needed. And you can educate people through information, you can educate them through the news, or you can educate them by trying to inspire and bring them in. And what I love about this piece is not only it's a horrific story, but the beauty of the animation, the incredible sound effects that are in there. You get sucked into the story. It's not just someone lecturing you about the problem. You get sucked in. And I think that's the key, because these things don't happen overnight. They do take time. Anybody can get a headline once, and then everyone thinks, oh, well, that problem's solved. The key is to keep this out there over time until it really, really is solved. And pieces like this enable this story to have longer life. They bring in a different element. They make people think in a different way. Some people will reject ivory because of the cruelty to elephants. Some people will reject it because they're worried about the extinction of elephants. Others will just think about the human side of things, that it's not just that there's the terrorism involved, that people are dying. Economies are being damaged in Africa. People are losing their jobs. People are losing their education. I asked one gentleman in Kenya, when he saw a poached elephant, how did he feel? And he said, I feel that's 200 children that haven't been educated in our village, because the money from conservation was going to that. So we have to tell these broader stories, and it's not going to be one magic bullet that kills the demand for ivory. It'll be a combination of things until we reach a tipping point. The good news is we reached a tipping point in 1989. And in 1989, there was an international ban on ivory trade. And basically, the markets in most of the world collapsed. That was a long time ago now, and people have maybe forgotten. You know, the images that went out around that ban, the world basically closed the thing down. There are new consumers in China that weren't in the ivory market at that time. Now they are. So we need to do that whole effort again. But I believe we can do this. The biggest single thing that could be done to save the elephant is for China to ban the legal sales of ivory that currently go on. The history of the ivory trade is the legal mechanisms, as we've heard, enable people to launder illegal ivory through the system. You have the ostensibly legal and ostensibly legitimate side, and all the poached ivory is going through those channels. And so we have to close that down. The way we're going to do that, you can't kind of lobby in the same way in China as you can in the United States, but you can influence people through public opinion and through understanding. And so our big desire is this film is going to get far and wide. In China, we've already talked to some of the biggest internet companies over there. We have partnerships with groups like CCTV, the state-run TV industry. Last year, we had $170 million of media space donated in China, mostly by public media. So people in China do care when they have the information, but we have to get them the information. And one of the best ways of conveying information is in a dramatic way like this that has a huge emotional pull. I have to tell some of my colleagues, it's not about the facts, it's about the emotion. You know, people change their behavior for the emotion, they then rationalize it with the facts. And I think what's fantastic about this piece is the emotional pull to it, the intensity of it, and it's an amazing piece of work, and we're very proud to be associated with it.
Thank you. On that note, thank you very much. I think we should take, we don't have much time, but I'd like to take a few questions from the audience just to see what any of you are thinking. Yeah.
The question was how much of the ivory sold in the United States is destined for international markets, and what we can do here in order to stop that from happening. I can tell you from just experience of our cases that a considerable amount of the ivory that we seized and the records that we seized indicated that the ivory was either being sent to China was a big market, Europe, South America, and I think I would follow up with what Peter just said. You're going to pull people in with emotion, and I think that here we should also ban and have no exemptions around permitting and selling ivory. It should just be banned. You cannot do it. But in order to get to that point, and in order to have legislators buy into that, you need to have the public feel that that is a priority and that is what they want to happen, and they will lobby their legislators to change that law. You know, you can have many conversations where people talk about the laws and use words to describe what is happening in Africa. But with a film like this, there's really no other conclusion you can reach than it must be banned, not just for the elephants, but because terrorist groups that, even if you don't care about elephants, because maybe there are legislators who don't care, people who don't care, but they care about terrorism. And I think linking those two things and using that to make to lobby for a ban is what we can do, and one of the brilliant things of this film.
Who else? Yeah.
What is it? It runs the gamut. There are lots of very cheap, low-level, literally trinkets, little carved items, flowers, ironically, little elephants, little animals. There are also the newly made, not the antique, natsuke items. You know, the Japanese natsuke. But then there are also puzzle boxes that are intricately carved boxes within a box. We have found tusks that are carved with, you know, pastoral scenes. So it really runs the gamut.
Yes.
Sure, and I'll do a little shameless plug here. On November the 18th, Animal Planet is doing a show with Yao Ming, the basketball player, the most people in China. We took him to Africa and we went to villages just like you're talking about. And what we were told there by the people is that, you know, they depend on direct revenues from the tourism industry to fund their schools and their healthcare. And so I think it was very good what Peter said there. There was a point in time previously in southern Africa where people were saying, oh, there's conflict with elephants and there's too many of them. Now that's changed. You know, people are now going, hey, they may go. So there is a lot of work going on the ground. There has been that for a long time. And, you know, one of the key things is just giving local communities more of a stake in tourism, making sure that tourism isn't just big Western rich companies making the money, but the money really does trickle down. There are real good jobs for local Africans there. Beyond that, I think my experience is that you know, people may be living in very, very simple circumstances. They may be living in what we would call poverty, but they get the sense that the elephant and their environment is part of their existence, their culture, their life. And you know, and when people come and see that, they'll travel all the way around the world to come and see that. They're pretty proud of it. And so I think there can be more done for local communities, but that's been addressed over time. One of the good things of this ivory crisis is a lot of the African governments have got a lot more serious about it now. People like President Bongo from Gabon has really got serious. The Tanzanian government and the Clintons have a lot to thank for this, getting the African leaders to say, hey, come on, you've got to get this together. And so that is progressing, I think, in a very positive way. And the big key is, can we just now stop the demand, you know, destroying it before they're capable of building a much more long-term sustainable life for elephants, where people and elephants coexist, where local people benefit, I think, increasingly. This is an asset which is only going to go up in value if you keep them alive. More and more people want to go. The cost of safaris goes up and up. This can be a major source of development if it's still there for people to have.
I think we only have time for maybe 2 more questions. The gentleman is asking me how the story evolved in terms of telling it backwards, and it really had to do a lot with not wanting to end on something that would be quite so devastating. You know, end on elephants that were alive and whole and complete and had their tusks, and also the idea of extinction and just creating a structure that would be unusual and kind of captivating. And so it was really pretty much that. Yes. I'll certainly agree with you there. Yeah, he's an extraordinary filmmaker. If any of you haven't seen it, you need to see that movie.
I think it's Princess Mononoke.
Princess Mononoke.
It's an extraordinary environmental movie.
But maybe who wants to take the other?
How do you get the governments involved? Well, it's a bit of a process, and what I didn't actually say earlier is that with the shark fin soup consumption now, which has been the main campaign we started, the consumption in China is now down 50 to 70% in the last 2 years. And that's been a combination of the public awareness led by Yao Ming, but with our campaigns and all these different people. And secondly, the government was the one giving us the airtime, you know. So the Chinese government is not unsympathetic to some of these issues. The Chinese government is not a monolith. There's all these different factions. There's certain factions that are making money out of the ivory trade. There's others that are pretty sympathetic. So it's about making them see that this is beyond just the elephants. They won't do it just for the elephants. They look at economy. Our argument is Africa is your biggest trading partner now. You want good relations with African trading partners. This is something you can do for your trading partners. We've also said to them, you know, you're going to be either criticized and vilified for this issue, or you can take the leadership and you can lead the world. You can ban the ivory trade before the United States bans the ivory trade. And that's our goal, is to get them to do it before. So we try and have a carrot side and not just a stick side. And it's just ongoing engagement and just keeping it out there and showing them there's public support to do this and to make it happen. And, you know, China, they say that it's the cultural use of ivory, and it's been there. And of course there's history, and of course there's a culture. But there's other things that can be carved. And in fact, in 1989, I went back to Hong Kong after the ban, and I said, you know, I've got this tusk, I'd like to get it carved. They said, oh, all the carvers are carving other things now. We can't even get them to carve ivory. So things will switch away from it. So it's a question of persuasion. It's a question of pressure. I don't think anyone can bully China into anything. You know, but I think they can be persuaded, and I think the persuasion is best when it comes from Chinese, and that's why we're going to put this out in China on Chinese outlets, why we've got Chinese celebrities doing this messaging, why we've got Yao Ming championing this. Yao Ming's proposed the ban through the National People's Congress. That is the only down-up mechanism within the Chinese government. And it's what they did on shark fin, and the government banned shark fin from state banquets, and that was a contributor in the 50 to 7% decline. So it's doable, it takes a bit of patience, but things like this keep the issue out there, they keep the pressure on, and that's what we need to do.
All right, Peter, you've got a big task in front of you. All right, so to close, I just want to say, first of all, thank you to all of you. Thank you to being here. And I guess it's sort of incumbent upon us to do whatever we can. Even just the smallest gesture, I think, will be of great help because it'll be additive. And finally, at the end of the day, wouldn't it feel great just to save the elephants? I mean, how could that not be wonderful? Thank you, thank you.